What's up guys, this is Nick at Stridewise.com and today I am filming an explosive boot comparison of two of the most popular boots in the world, Timberlands and Doc Martens. I've reviewed a lot of boots before that are popular inside the world of boots, like Viberg versus Alden, Thursday versus Wolverine, Alan Edmonds versus Grant Stone. But these boots are probably the most popular boots outside of the world of boots, among people who don't spend all day reading subreddits about welting techniques and stuff like that. These are the kind of boots that like everyone in the street can recognize and a lot of people own. And so a ton of people have asked me to do this boot comparison, which you might call the boot comparison. These are the two most iconic boots of all time. So let's just get into it. Timberland, here it is. First thoughts, it's a chunky boot. Relative to the Doc Martens, this has a really luggy kind of sole here. It's called grip stick. The last itself, like the shoe, is pretty, you would use the word voluminous, like it's got a lot of space in here as well. It's an outdoorsy looking boot. Relative to the Doc Marten, which is quite a bit more slim, I wouldn't call it a very sleek boot, but still when you're comparing these two boots, just from the get-go, the Timberland more screams outdoorsiness and ruggedness than the Doc Marten. I also wanted to point out the chunkiness of this boot, the Timberland, makes it pretty hard to pull off with skinny jeans or really slim jeans. It needs to be a little bit baggy. Otherwise, because the boot is so chunky, it sort of just sticks out at the bottom. So that definitely is going to give Doc Martens an edge among the skinny jeans crowd. And let's be honest, that's the kind of crowd that Doc Martens are really popular in. Just a couple of things I want to point out. These are Taslan nylon laces. This leather color is very iconic with this boot. And although you can't see it, this boot is fully 100% insulated. So that makes it a little bit heavier, but it does make it a lot more functional for some people, like people in really cold weather. This originally, before it got really popular in the hip hop crowd, was a favorite boot of like farmers and so on up in New England. So this boot, I would say it is a bit more functional than Doc Martens, which was actually originally designed for housewives with back pain and foot pain who needed nice soft soles. So the Doc Martens, this sole here, originally Doc Marten, who was a doctor in the German army in World War II, made these prototypes with the tires of planes that he found at Luftwaffe airfields. One thing I want to make super clear here, this is the Doc Marten 1460. It is the most popular boot from Doc Martens, the most iconic. However, in my last review, I annoyed some people because I was not reviewing the made in England Doc Martens, which are more expensive and higher quality. But the fact is they're just not as popular. These are the most popular versions. It's the one you're likely to see on people's feet when they have Doc Martens. So this is indeed the made in Asia Doc Marten. I've got to make that one clear just because that's the boot that everybody wears. Big differences, obviously the leather that's going to stick out at you. This is a nubuck over on the Timberland. This is a very, very smooth, very corrected leather from Doc Martens. They call it full grain, although it is quite corrected. It's smoothed out. It's quite plasticky in my opinion. It's not the most rugged leather you're going to find, especially if you're more used to the sort of leather you get on heritage work boots. Pretty thin, but it does have this nice sheen that a lot of people really like. It's so smooth that it does sort of stand out. It almost shines on its own. So a lot of people like that, and that is a quality that you don't get in a lot of more heritage work boots. Besides that, the silhouette, less chunky than the Doc Martens, but still really not a particularly sleek boot. It's sort of a generic sort of shape. It's a little bit blobby in my opinion. It doesn't contour the foot quite as well as some other boots. I did want to point that out. The sole, very, very soft. That's a big difference with the Timberland. And also finally, it's mostly single stitched along the counter and down by the laces. There's some triple stitching on the side, but as I mentioned earlier, it does not scream durability and ruggedness quite in the same way as a Timberland boot does. So when you're comparing these leathers, they are obviously pretty different. I'm gonna start with this one. This leather is in fact nubuck. A lot of people assume it's suede, which has a sort of similar texture, but it's not. Nubuck is a top grain leather, which means that it's made from the top layer of the animal's hide, and suede is made from the inside. And it's been sanded or buffed on the grain side, the outside of the leather, to give it a slight nap of protein fibers, which like changes color when you rub it, which is kind of cool. So obviously it's very brightly colored, so the boots really stand out from any outfit. And they're a nice break from plain brown or black boots. The big downside though is that although it's waterproof, which is very good, it's super hard to keep clean. It's really the most frustrating aspect of this boot. So they need regular care to keep clean. You want to get maybe a pencil eraser or a stiff brush, and maybe some Renubuck, which is a care product that Timberland sells for this particular type of leather. With the Doc Martens, this semi-bright leather comes from either South America or Asia. They told me, they couldn't get more specific than that. And again, it's really, really smooth. There's not a trace of grain on the skin. People call that corrected grain, and it's definitely a big part of why these look, in my opinion, kind of plasticky. Like, it looks a lot less leather-like than a lot of boots out there with like tougher leather, less corrected leather. Neither of these two boots has the best leather on earth, but the Doc in particular looks like it can't really withstand a lot of damage. That's not to say it can't, like there are a lot of old Docs out there, but if what you want is a commando type boot that looks like it can be worn during an army tour, that's not this boot. As for the soles, this rubber outsole on the Timberland is called Grip Stick. It's actually made from 10% recycled materials, which is like in line with Timberland's earth-friendly branding, which is kind of a nice touch. There's also a rubber midsole and a urethane insole. There's no leather or cork to be found here, but there is a steel shank in here, and everything is topped off with this removable foam inset. So that gives it some extra shock absorption, some extra softness. It's kind of nice. It doesn't really mold to your foot over time in the same way as like leather or cork does in more expensive boots, but it is very comfy from the get-go, and it's got solid arch support, and the shock absorption again is really good. The Doc Martens also has really good shock absorption. I think ever so slightly better because the rubber here is really, really, really soft. Originally, these shoes were designed for people with orthotic concerns, foot pain when the boot was first released. So the sole, I think, is the best part of the Doc Martens boot, the 1460. I mean, it depends on what you want though. If you want like a really sturdy sole like you normally get on a pair of Goodyear welted boots, you don't get that here. This is more for people that like the look of boots but will miss their sneakers. It is Goodyear welted, by the way, but it's made with an unusual heat sewing technique that makes it very hard to resole. Some cobblers specialize in it, but generally speaking, it's pretty hard to resole these boots. But you know, the Timberlands are also very hard to resole. After the rubber, there's some cork material in here and a urethane insole as well, but there's no shank, so this doesn't have the stability and arch support of the Timberland. Not at that level anyway. All right, so as far as the fit and the sizing and the comfort go, I'll start with the Timberlands. These boots, a lot of people say they're true to size. I'm an 11.5 and it's true to size. I got in a pair of these in 11.5. I had to go down a half size. I had to send them back. It was pretty annoying. These are indeed, they run large. 11 is good. I probably could have even gone with a 10.5, to be honest. I don't think that would have been a big deal, and I've never said that about a pair of boots before. The 11 is good though, it fits fine. I do want to emphasize again, it's pretty roomy in there, which is not a bad thing necessarily. As far as the look goes, yeah, it looks like a little bit more bulbous and bulky, but the upside of those sorts of boots, definitely you can wiggle your toes in there. It's nice and roomy. And all that stuff going on in the sole of the Timberlands that I mentioned earlier means, again, the shock absorption is really good and the arch support is good. Way better than the Doc Martens. So with the Doc Martens, starting off with the sizing, a big bummer and big surprise with this brand, despite how huge it is they don't have half sizes. So look, I got a size 11. It's fine, it's a tiny bit big, but I definitely couldn't get a 10 and there's no option for a 10.5. So here I am with a slightly large shoe. It's fine, it's not a big deal. The upsides of this shoe, it's really light, a lot lighter than the Timberland. A lot of people are gonna like that. And the sole is really, really comfortable. Much, much softer than the Timberland sole, if that's something you're going after. So it has nice shock absorption. It's very rubbery. It's sort of like walking around in a pair of sneakers in a lot of ways. So if you're someone who wants to get a pair of boots, but you don't really like the feeling of clumping around in boots with like cork outsoles or even soles like a Timberland, this is a good option. It is more sneaker-like than many other boots. However, the arch support is not that great. There's no shank in there. And generally, the fit is just a bit blobby. It's a bit generic. It's a bit shapeless. It didn't feel like it contoured my foot very well, and it wasn't very well supported. So upsides of the Doc Martens, much, much softer sole and much, much lighter shoe overall. Downsides, not so great arch support, and in general, it doesn't contour the foot or the arch quite as well as a Timberland. Now, one thing that's really easy to compare with boots is the price. And as far as the price goes, I really need to point out that when you have boots as popular as these, which again are probably the most popular boots out there among them anyway, you can get a really wide variety of prices because a million different outlets sell it. It's not hard to get on sale so long as you're like relatively patient. They're always on eBay. People are always jumping in my comments telling me this whenever I say the price of any pair of shoes. So yes, you can get them for cheaper, but if you are getting them full price, from Amazon or from the company themselves. Timberland between $160 and $180. And the Doc Martens between $120 and $150. This is roughly generally speaking. So both of these are considered inexpensive boots. Yes, they are more expensive than sneakers, and for a lot of people, that's what they're used to before they get these boots. These are oftentimes people's first pair of boots. Relative to like Goodyear welted boots, the nicer sort of boots that I've looked at before, those usually start at minimum $200, $250, oftentimes $300, $400, $500. So these are considered inexpensive boots in the world of boots, and the Doc Marten is definitely the cheapest out of the two. All right, so what's the verdict? Which one is actually the better boot? Look, they're very different boots, I'll admit it. They do have quite a few things in common though. They're both cultural icons. They're both relatively close as far as price goes as well. The Doc Martens is cheaper, but still, they're both in that pretty narrow range of $120 to $160. That's not a massive, massive difference. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run through the pros and cons of each boot, comparing them to one another so you can make up your own mind. I'm gonna start with the Timberland. A big pro that this boot has is that it is fully waterproof and fully insulated. It's a lot friendlier in colder weather. If you're up in the Northeast, if you're in New York City where I live, this is more functional in that regard. And overall, I would say it's just a tougher pair of boots. There's more going on in the sole. There's better grip on the bottom as well. It's gonna be more useful in icy conditions or wet conditions. So certainly it has a lot more versatility as far as the environments in which it can thrive. I do want to emphasize that. The arch support is also better. And also generally speaking, I think next to a pair of Doc Martens, this wet is very contested, but I consider the Timberlands more masculine boots. Like they fit into, I think, a few different more areas of fashion than the Doc Martens, which I think have a lot of cultural baggage attached to them, which I'm gonna get into a little bit later on. The downsides with the Timberlands, they are more expensive, ever so slightly more expensive, but they are nonetheless the more expensive boot, like that's undeniable. The thing that really bugs me with these shoes though, the leather is super hard to keep clean, which is funny because I consider them tougher boots. Like I think they can withstand more damage. But yeah, the downside is this leather, this nubuck, it does accrue stains and spots very easily. You can clean it, like they're usually not permanent stains, but it's sort of a routine you have to keep up with these boots if you want them looking relatively new. And the thing with Timbs is that is what a lot of people want. There's sort of like a religion around keeping your Timbs looking as close to new as possible. It's sort of like white sneakers in that regard. It's a thing a lot of people really take pride in. And that does take more time. You know, the Doc Martens, the leather is not the best, but it cannot be denied that, well, they're black, first of all, but also it's a different type of leather that is a lot easier to keep clean. You don't have to think about their cleanliness quite as much. That's definitely worth emphasizing. And the other main downside of the Timbs is that they're pretty chunky. You know, that's probably not gonna be a downside for most people. But again, if you keep slimmer fitted pants, yeah, they can kind of stick out the bottom like big boats. So you need to sort of move your fashion around the Timberlands to a certain extent. The pros and cons of the Doc Marten, meanwhile, really quickly, it is cheaper. This leather is a lot easier to manage and take care of. It doesn't get stains really easily. And for a lot of people, that's like the biggest priority with the pair of boots. So I really want to emphasize that. Also, the sole is nice and soft. The shock absorption is ever so slightly better with this pair of boots. And it does feel closer to a pair of sneakers than the Timberland. So if that's a feeling that you're after, the Doc Martens can probably satisfy that. The downsides of the Doc Marten, it is unlined. It has no shank, so the arch support is not as good. I would also say the fit overall is just a bit more blobby. It doesn't contour the foot as well. And it really is a big deal that Doc Martens doesn't offer half sizes. So it's hard to get the right size for your foot, you know? There's a chance I would have been a bit more comfortable in a 10.5, but I couldn't get a 10. So yeah, that's really worth emphasizing here. The leather, although it is easier to take care of, it's just not as tough a boot. The leather's pretty thin. It's single stitched in a lot of places, whereas the Timberland has like quadruple stitches on most of it. So that is like sort of an aesthetic thing, but also it is a function thing as well that I wanted to emphasize. And generally speaking, I think the Timberland is a more rugged, it's more tough, it can withstand more damage. The Docs, they are slimmer, yes, but also I just think this leather is not super high quality. This yellow stitching here, I think really sort of, it can throw a lot of people off. It doesn't blend as easily into as many outfits. And it's also a shoe that's meant for both men and women, like they get the same shoe. So in my opinion, this shoe, it is a bit harder to pull off with as many outfits as the Timberland. All right, those are my thoughts on the Timberland versus Doc Martens, the two most popular boots out there. I tried to keep things pretty objective, but in my pretty subjective opinion, I think the Timberlands are tougher. They can work in more environments and also more outfits, I think. The Docs, I think it's a bit hard for a guy to wear them if he's not in his teens or 20s, unless he's in a band. If you do fall into those categories, I think they can work. And also the sole is a lot softer as well. It's more sneaker-like, so that might also be a priority for you. If you want to see the full written review, by the way, it's in the description below, and make sure you subscribe because I've got a ton more boot reviews and comparisons and tips coming up.